For today's project, I'm going to show you how to make a portrait on glass. This portrait is easily accessible for beginners, so try not to be intimidated. For this project, you will need a picture frame with glass. Picked up a small 5x7 frame from the local thrift store for 50 cents, or maybe you have an extra one around the house already. You'll need some paint. You can do something simple, which is 2 colors, or if you have access to more options, you can do a full color portrait like I did here. Start by removing the glass from the frame. The edges can be sharp, so be careful and gentle as not to chip or break it or cut yourself. And set the frame and backing aside and clean the glass on both sides thoroughly. You will take the glass and lay it over your reference picture. Now your picture can be anything. I found a picture that I liked on the internet and printed it out to exactly the same size as the glass, which was 5x7. I found that the less detailed your picture is, the more success you will have as a beginner. Close-up pictures of faces or objects work better than full-body shots or landscapes. I chose to paint Joseph McNeil, who at 17 years old in February 1960 went into a Woolworths store in Greensboro, North Carolina, and sat down to have coffee with 3 friends. Although their legal right, the manager refused to serve them. They stayed sitting there calmly and peacefully until closing. Then they came back again the next day and did it again. Their actions started a revolution. Listen to Joseph recount the experience in his own words.
We started growing. First day 4, the second day probably 16 or 20. It was organic. It's a mind of its own. It kept growing. We decided that whatever actions we were going to take, they were going to be nonviolent. We remained nonviolent. On the 3rd day, it started to get rough. At any time, we could have been carried out of that store in a pine box. I walked away with an attitude that if our country is screwed up, don't give up. Unscrew it. Don't give up. Which in retrospect is pretty good for a bunch of teenagers.
Martin Luther King Jr., speaking about the actions of these young people, said, "By sitting down, they were making a stand." Now, as a youth worker, I'm always so inspired by stories of teenagers that can change the world through simple actions like this. This story is important and should not be forgotten. I may not have an audience that can inspire millions. I may not be someone that will march in the streets, but I am an artist, and I can use my art to tell stories, and that's why I chose this particular portrait to paint today. You want to start with the darkest colors and details first. So in this case, I'll use black paint and simply paint on the glass over the pictures all the areas that look black on the picture underneath. Think of this sort of like paint by number. And then rather than brushing the paint over the glass, which will leave more noticeable brush lines in your final product, dab the paint on evenly over the surface. When working on the more detailed areas, like around the eyes, nose, and mouth, make sure you're using small enough brush to be able to capture the details, but use quite a lot of paint to be sure that the line will be dark enough to see on the final product. If you don't put it on thick enough, the lines will disappear, and there's no way to correct this once the other colors are applied. It can sometimes feel like you're putting too much black on. Like around the eyes, it almost looks like I've given him thick eyeliner. But you'll see how in the final product, some of the black has washed away and it looks more normal. It's tricky with this project because you don't know exactly what the end product will look like until you're done and you flip it over. And so it's a little scary, but it's also a unique adventure that doesn't often happen in art, so try to enjoy it. Now, it's best to wait for the black to dry before you continue, or the paint can mix on the glass and lead to unwanted color. You can use a hair dryer to speed up this process, or you can go for it like I did here, wet paint and all. To capture the shading, I'm going to switch to a dark brown color, looking for places that are dark but not black. And it can be tricky to see if you're not used to it, so be patient. Take your time, think about where you want to apply these things. Again, thinking about this as a paint by number. What areas would be that darker brown color? From there, I keep adding bits of white to the brown paint that I have to lighten it up, and then do the next layer of color from there. And it's okay to overlap the colors, but again, it's best to dry it, have it dry before you do that, or it could mix and mess up your details. But at the same time, you could just be adventurous and go for it and not worry about what the end product will be and just enjoy the process. It doesn't have to be all of these details. You don't have to do as many shades as I've done here. It'd be enough to do the black, like a dark brown or even a gray, and a light brown or white. It just depends on how detailed you want, if you want kind of something that's more of a black and white portrait or a full color one like I've done here. Now, I've done this project quite a few times, and I find that I've improved each time I've done it, but I've enjoyed it every time that I've tried. So don't be afraid of what the end product will be. Just give it a shot and learn from it. So my camera ended up cutting out through some of that process, but as you can see here, I've added all the layers of tone, and it looks kind of like big blotches of color on the glass. I also added a white border around the outside as well for his shirt. I kept pretty tight lines here so that you could see more or less what I've done, but the beauty of this project is once that you've covered the majority of the glass, you don't really have to be careful with your paint anymore. And if the white line, for instance, covers over the black of his hair or his suit, it doesn't really matter because it won't show through at the end. This also means I don't have to use such a small brush anymore, and so you can see I switched to a foam brush so I can dab the paint on larger areas. I also added a red background to help make the portrait have some pop to it at the end, and you want to cover the entirety of the surface of the glass in paint, or the backing of the frame will show through. And as the paint dries, it will be thicker in some places than others. And in some cases, at the end, you might be able to see through it, and this could make your final product look like it has holes in it. And I combat this by taking the darker brown colors that I have and covering the majority of the face. And this means that the painted surface, like what we're looking at here, it just looks like a blob. But when we flip it over, you'll see that because I've added the darker behind the light, it actually makes it full, not so thin, and it has rich and vibrant and detailed colors in it. I also do multiple layers over the red and black as well to make sure the surface is covered completely. And it's possible to make some adjustments to this later because we're not working in details. So when you flip it over and you see that it's thin, you can add more paint to it if you're unhappy and how much you can see through. Once you are finished and it's dry, then you can take your frame that you had set aside earlier and put your glass back into the frame. Be really careful as to not to chip the glass or cut yourself as you're putting this back in. Set it in, put the backing back on, flip down the tabs or however your frame goes together, and then we will have our reveal. Of course, you would have looked at your piece already, but I'm saving mine till the very end, although you've seen it in the pictures already. But this is the funnest part of the project, is flipping the picture over and seeing what it is that you've ended up with. So there you have it, portrait on glass of Joseph McNeil, who is inspirational to me, and I hope that this video inspires you to tell the story of someone or just simply to do some art. Thanks for your time. Catch you later. Peace.